there is a split between the authority in this civilization, and this is between the upper echelon and the lower echelon that is considered a kind of continuum or conglomerate even of a collection, if you will, of civilizations that extend through 7 layers in the universe. And these are temporal harmonic fields, which are akin to 7 layers of pulsations, octaves, or harmonic frequencies, bands of frequency that denote and separate the occurrence of universal developments. So the power structure in this civilization is currently split between layers of echelon, levels of echelon, which are described as 7 fundamental harmonic universes or temporal fields, which are akin to harmonic frequencies or pulsations of information, which are generated out of an original central database of information from which all 7 harmonic frequencies are derived. And these 7 frequencies, similar to octaves of sound or color frequency, are literal layers of civilization and existence and harmonic universes, each to one another. And so these are the occurrence of life in the universe, and in each layer of these universal occurrences of time, which are akin to simulation because of the way they are all derived from a central base of information, these are akin to simulators or simulations. These extend one from another like the Mayan time pyramids, and this is the same, the general shape matches the concept. That's what they're describing, because one layer folds into the other layer, kind of like an accordion nesting dolls or a jack-in-the-box. And so, as well, each layer down progressively operates on a more dense or a slower, technically you could say a faster version of time, to the point where at the very highest layer, the amount of time that passes for, say, a day or a lifetime or a moment would be compared to many, many times that occurring on the lower layers. This is kind of confusing because that's how time and consciousness works as an interplay of perception. For instance, is if it takes one day in the upper layer to pass, or while one day passes on the upper layer, 1,000 days passes on the lower layer, then does time pass more quickly on the lower layer because there are 1,000 days, hundreds more days fitting into one continuous segment, if you will, or does time pass more slowly? meaning your perception lasts that much longer and experience is drawn out that much more. So it's really an interplay of perception, but that differential is the basic idea. And so right now there's the power structure. There's a split between the power structure of those who know and those who don't know, and those who operate under the control structure of the lower level, and those who operate basically in accordance and guidance with the higher level. And our government, if you could call it that, there's really no such thing ever to show. The power structure has been split, and it is believed that it will slowly shift, kind of like a parabola, from the predominant lower structure power to the higher. And this is through integration of the ideals of the larger universe into this society. And so it's not necessarily a battle between them, but a kind of correlation with what energies and experiences people are willing to bring forth and accept. And so these groups are working to accelerate these changes, while others are working to basically stagnate and tie everything up. The lower group is from the lower layer below this one, and this is pretty much a kind of heaven to them, if you will, where they can do anything they please. But of course that makes it like a hell to us, because that would be considered their quote-unquote layer of origin, their harmonic universe of origin. And so the whole process folds up like an accordion, and all the layers return to one cosmic civilization. However, for this to occur, there are mass exoduses that have to take place from one layer to the next, and this pretty much is a kind of collapse of probabilities and time, which correspond to many changes that take place throughout each civilization, each time period, and their level of development. And so we are in one of those time periods now, and how people respond to this information and what side they place themselves, along with how they go about doing that, is going to determine how our society transitions, and whether those people basically regress into a lower layer, or whether they transcend more or less and join the higher layers. So again, I want to remind people that what happens here is pretty much an interplay between a holographic, one could call it a containment system, one could call it an environment, one could call it a kind of computer system, generating, or maybe based simulator that runs on, like any other computer system, a language, a format to produce functions and directives, basically to produce an order, a hierarchy, and that DNA is part of this holographic code. Another way I can take this talk is to look at the what is known as the Gnostic and cult information. or knowledge, excuse me. So we have the idea that we may be in a type of spiritual enslavement system which may or may not be produced through this holographic system, meaning what we produce within and create around us could be creating it. And so then by getting people to create such a system through media, religions, things like that, mind control basically, controllers are enabling this process which wouldn't actually exist, and in that word, or in that explanation, doesn't actually exist as the fundamental reality or enclosure for our existence. Excuse the barking dog. So in that explanation, if it's not the fundamental underlying reality, then it's being generated. And this is through deception and coercion, essentially spiritual enslavement or mind control. As well, this is a subjugation of the original creative capacity of people and their own internal power. And it's a rerouting or a subversion of that power to create their own enslavement system. And so that's one explanation. Another explanation is that the entire system is a closed-loop containment system, linearly, fundamentally, actually designed as a containment system, as a kind of spiritual trap, where we are generators for this system. Because of the unique nature of consciousness, light, what we consider space, time, and essentially the universe, I feel most motivated to say that we really can't produce a definite answer. However, with both we can extrapolate the meaning. And the meaning is that there are possibilities and there are reasons behind the occurrences, and there must be a fundamental reality regardless. And so, if that is the nature of this universe as a kind of, essentially a self-destructive spiritual prison system, a few questions arise, and these are largely relative to morality and what we perceive to be the priorities, the true priorities of the human, and essentially what's right and wrong. And the question can kind of go something like, what's right and wrong if the system itself is a trap? And there's a lot of agendas in this school of thought, in these questions, because if you can provide someone the answer by stimulating enough of the questions in the proper context, then you can stimulate the answer. And if you can do that, then you can stimulate their outlook, their religion. And so it's kind of funny, the movie Sausage Party is actually soft disclosure of this direct process of both the use of mind control, and it is a form of mind control in itself, serving to propagate or to promote some of the agendas of the current system. And if you pay attention to the aspects, you'll see what these little hidden messages and agendas are. Basically, they're trying to give people the answer by proposing the questions, the premises, in a context of their choosing. And so, regardless of that, the idea, and so therein lies the prospects of what the true goal is. And it kind of goes like this: if there is such a system, regardless of how that system promotes replicates or basically attempts to distort or dictate, basically is the word I'm looking for. There are better words, but dictate by deriving said ethics and morality from the pretext of a given control system. Basically, the idea is to dictate our morality through that system, regardless of that aspect of the situation. So regardless of the potentially contrived nature of the morality derived from such a deceptive system, what is the goal of a person beyond the facade of that system, if such a system does exist, and the possibility that we're in one of the systems now? Basically a false reality designed solely for the subjugation of its inhabitants, which isn't usually the idea, because you gotta imagine something is defined by the possibilities that occur from it, regardless of what we say we meant to do and what kind of explanations we come up with. The reason something happens in reality is to initiate cause, to lead to the results that occur from it, regardless of what the silly person thinks happens. So, if such a system exists, and if there is a way to overcome it, then that in itself is part of the reason the system exists. So if there's an enslavement system, then cosmically speaking, potentially speaking, this is also basically a type of training situation, and this borders on the surreality and the mind control, because we're taught to believe to conclude that, there's a line of reasoning that is as follows, and that is, if this is a spiritual enslavement system, part of the mind control is to basically convince people that it's for their own good. But regardless, if such a system exists in the universe, nothing is really by chance, so part of the existence is the possibility that somebody will achieve wholeness outside the system, regardless of if it's a trap. It's kind of, semantics here and perspective, because it's like saying a trap is meant to be overcome. Pain is meant to teach us a lesson, and there's a meaning behind that as far as pain, to teach a lesson to not, experience more pain. But what about pain basically for the essence of feeling pain? Okay, is that entirely unnecessary? Does that produce any desired results in a situation? So that kind of coincides with this, if we are in a spiritual enslavement system, to the degree of, well, what if we didn't, it's not a system of pain or progress or some type of, uniquely designed test. It's literally just a trap, plain and simple. So then at that point, there's no way of reasoning with it. The only outcome is that we are supposed to supersede it, overcome challenges, but the actual design and intention is to cause failure. It's kind of like saying, if somebody intends to go up and punch someone in the face, well, they're not intending that person to get a better grip on fighting styles and stances and movement and things like that. But if a person goes and spars with someone, okay, now they're intending to help that person improve themselves. So it's semantics, but it also comes down to this cosmic situation with these demigods and false creators and things like that. So the idea, again, the original idea, goes back to the question that if this is such a system and we're in it, does the morality derived from that system override a personal morality that could be said to be aligned or correlated to a fundamental or cosmic morality which exists regardless of the particular holographic containment system, the spiritual enslavement system, and therefore is beyond it and is a part of a larger system. If there is such a morality, and there's good reasons to assume there is, such as attaining knowledge, learning to produce harmony, which, all these moralities and more so possible objectives to grow and learn and adapt, they also simultaneously lead out of this type of time matrix consciousness decay trap system. And so it's kind of hand in hand. It goes back to the overall meaning of what the purpose of this place is. The idea is, or at least the question that I've refined more closely now, possibly in a verbose manner, is that if there is a secondary morality, and this is fundamental and related to our survival in this universe, then this universe is not the supreme universe. This is actually a secondary universe, and that secondary morality that we have is not actually the secondary morality that we must adhere to while we first worry about our own hides and get out of this darn place dealing with the morality or lack of morality issues that go along with that type of outlook. But that secondary morality of the larger universe is actually the fundamental morality. And this place then becomes the secondary morality in the secondary universe. It basically becomes a false construct, which is an imitation system of the original system from which the original morality, consciousness, the blueprint of humanity, the body system, from which all of that is taken, replicated, and imitated in a false construct, which is what we know today with broken memory, basically a highly contradictory biological system from the brain in the individual parts to the higher and lower aspects of the biology to the way consciousness and electromagnetism works and psychology, DNA, all these functions that seem to be kind of thrown together at an odds to produce either a very tough learning situation that results in somebody who understands themselves and the universe that much more easily, or more or less a kind of trap that people can identify with coming from that larger universe and basically forget that original larger morality and identity and lose themselves to this forgetfulness and basically energetic degradation and confusion. And so the idea, again, is if there is a morality, a sense of morality that is larger than the idea of simply surviving in this place, and that's given if this place is a spiritual enslavement system, then that basically gives rise to the notion that not only is the spiritual enslavement system not the entirety and the complete creation or existence, but that it must be a secondary aspect of a much larger system where those original fundamental consciousness central, awareness, more so not consciousness, but awareness central features of experience are originated from. And so the idea is to then blend, or at least to coincide with that original morality while interacting in this potentially threatening situation. And so then we go deeper. And the question is, if this is a true spiritual enslavement system, if we are at threat of being lost to the system, then what are the parameters of morality? And in layman's terms, what is out of bounds as far as doing what it takes to survive and make it out of this system? So that's kind of the situation we're faced with in the human condition here. And as well, I believe this is all philosophical thought experiment evidence of a holographic system where we are producing the far ends of time, reality, conscious experience, the universe, the cosmos, and we are producing that through the particular alignment of our energies within and our intentions, our bioemissions, and our capacity to adapt and learn. But again, it keeps cascading and extending further. For instance, if this is such a system where it's not a spiritual enslavement system, we've been programmed to create such a system out of it. Well, then the idea is, when was the original programming put in? How deep was it put in? And how much control do we have over that? Because that then determines the parameters of whether we can actually turn the spiritual enslavement system that this has become just because we've slipped into that, and possibly by some type of adversary. But that's the parameters of whether we can turn that into the true reality and find completion and actually achieve wholeness. Because if we can't, then there's no point in saying it's a holographic containment system that we're creating, but we also have no power to change that, and that's just what it is. Because all that is a holographic containment system that is a prison. And it's not that we're creating it and we've been tricked into that, it's that it's so well built that it is designed to make us believe that we're creating it. And so that's where we basically, that's where we come in this philosophical Gnostic mind experiment saga, which is basically that either in a holographic system where we create what we experience, and we've been tricked into creating this experience so long, so far ago, that our very civilization, society, DNA, our bodies have malformed towards continually recreating this creation of the illusion, or it's an actual system that we kind of woke up in after being cosmically kidnapped and transferred to it. The idea here that saga, kind of crossroads or even barrier where we leave and you must take this on your own, is that both systems are exactly the same from our perspective within either or, whether we're creating it or whether it's one that was created for us and we were trapped within. So that's the paradox, that's the complexity, and that's the deception that's been used to bounce people from one or the other potential reality and keep them within a time matrix, whether it's just because the holographic system is capable of producing whatever a person is programmed to then subconsciously produce, or whether this universe is literally a device that is used to, trap souls. Regardless, the similarities are there, and the ability to tell them apart is imperceptible until we get to a certain layer where we can exhibit control over reality, which excludes one or the other possibility from taking place. And so that's where we get into true control, self-will, willpower, true awareness of the self, the knowledge of our history, the knowledge of the fundamental workings of reality and consciousness and time. And we basically have to go through these thought experiments to figure out who's really in control, whether we're kind of leading ourselves down a rabbit hole that we're simultaneously digging unknowingly, or whether these rabbit holes are dug here before us by someone else. It's expanse to the degree where I'm pretty sure either way, it's both neither, or it's both at the same time. It's both one or the other, just depending on how you look at it. And so, very strange, but basically we built this place to trap ourselves. And then perception becomes the idea, the question that's required of whether our perception is being generated by the system, excuse the dogs, by the system or by our own intelligences within. Basically, whether they are being projected around us and to us, or whether we are actually knowing and perceiving reality. And so then the study of perceptual illusions in psychology becomes paramount to understanding how our reality is altered by our perceptions and potentially constructed out of subjective perceptions. Again, that interplay of it could be either or is always apparent in all these studies. Pretty much follows all the way up to the pinnacle where we become the people who made this place and simultaneously the foreigners or the oppressors on the other end of the time bridge. And we realize it's ourselves messing with ourselves. As well, that's also a part of the system attempting to deviate and splice, even genetically, foreign elements into the human race. So if you see people, over there and they're like, we made it, okay, that makes sense. If you see another type of being and they're like, we made it, but they have to operate on the same level that you do, i.e. eating food and things like that, then they're probably foreigners trying to take your spot in the universe. And those are the actual parasites. And as well, there's cloning, so forget what I said about people, because unless you know how to tell the difference between one or the others, you're not going to know. But the idea is that if it's coming from the level that you're on and they're non-parasitic, then you can trust them. If they're coming from the level that you're on and you can't quite be sure what they eat or how they provide sustenance for themselves and all that, then they're liable to be lying to you to produce whatever they need to basically continue the charades. And in essence, they're trying to recreate themselves by splicing into your reality. And it's a deviation from the original, not a reunion. And both occur to the point where it's like, it's creepy like X-Files. And they're trying to trick us into basically the demiurge, into accepting them as the true wisdom, true origins, the creators, Sophia, etc. And then there's the original, which is on another level entirely, and basically doesn't have time for games or anything like that. Well, I mean, it does, but this is the game. So, very, very strange. As well, within such a system, there's an idea that if these quote-unquote unconscious or maybe subconscious aspects of our own unchecked intelligences are basically running around chasing people, playing the watcher adversary role, and they're pretty much just capable of performing the function of every aspect of truth and basically knowledge in the universe that we have overlooked, to the point where they can't trick us if we're aware of what they're doing, which is kind of like redundant, but the idea is then that gives an outline for what they're capable of in terms of, say, they could only operate on a mode of fear. They can only induce fear and chase the fear. Then somebody overcomes that. Okay, they go away because they can't function in that field anymore. There's no parameters. This would indicate that they really don't have free will. They don't have self-control. They're kind of like parasites just bouncing around. It also indicates that they're pretty much programmed as a type of counter action, or maybe a counterbalance to everything we do know, to all of our intelligences that are in check. Then the little shadow aspects of our collective psyche that we do not have in check or under control, then these go on to reflect back shadows in the universe, this holographic system, which become basically, they're evolved from programming code that is designed into the system as part of a response to errors. And so where we enable those errors, then these beings kind of pop up and chase the errors away. And if we're presumably producing it, it's kind of like a cat with a bag or something stuck to its foot, where it runs from the bag and it thinks the bag is chasing it because it's stuck to the foot. So if they're not free-willed, basically AI programs running in the back as background processing systems for the universe, directed towards eating up the causally defunct and intellectually short-circuited basically functions of human behavior and consciousness, then by not realizing that, yet continuing to produce the fear, the errors, the ignorance that they then chase, would be like the cat running away from the bag that's stuck to its foot or its tail or something. And it would be very convincing, where you could fly jets, and these little buggers would hop in their time bubbles and chase after, or just teleport there. So, in other words, as far as we can go, the complexity we can provide, well, like the bag attached to the cat, it would do the same, basically running from our own cosmic shadow. And so then we nullify that by taking away the parameters that enable its functioning, its activation, which are more or less ignorance, fear, and stagnation on a larger universal scale, which is confusing to say the least. But basically, if a person stagnates, these beings show up, and if they don't continue, then these beings apply pressure. And if they don't handle that pressure properly, then that pressure contributes to the stagnation, and thus a vicious cycle is born, like piranhas feeding on something that fell in the water. So this is part of why there is a body of knowledge that describes how people are lost at sea, and our souls are literally lost, trapped within the void, where because the physical layer where we come from, this civilization, we're not taught these fundamentals of the universe of consciousness, of the possibilities of corruption and basically shadow-mindedness or beings on a cosmic scale, that we're basically tossed out into the void, pretty much just like dust tossed to the wind. So this also coincides with one of the explanations I've been given, that the processing plant is not necessarily to enslave souls, but to keep them from dissolving into the void until they come back and re-educate themselves. And of course that makes Earth into a huge cosmic FEMA camp. Regardless, remember, until we get to the next level, it's basically both one and the other simultaneously. Both possibilities coincide. And I'm sure those who fail to choose the higher one, which leads to a central, in other words, a progressive trajectory that moves past that barrier, those that don't choose, don't apply themselves, don't use their self-will, okay, they end up defaulting back into the other one, where they kind of loop back around as these beings, applying this pressure on humanity, playing the oppressor role for themselves, which basically creates a cosmic loop. But of course, one breaks out of the loop through self-awareness, and this is the ability to comprehend the realities that are superimposed over one another in order to transcend, and through the process of awareness, to create a bridge between the reality we are in now and that trajectory, and a superimposed or invisible trajectory. And through these sacred motions, we learn the art of mastering ourselves interdimensionally or dimensionally, or just through consciousness. That's all it is. Consciousness is beaming off in a variety of emissions. And when we cycle through the spectrums and make all these processes, habits, productions that we're not aware of, how the energy is going or being profited off of, or what it's being motivated by, then we're producing multidimensional disharmony. We're producing that labyrinth that we're stuck in. And that's basically how the parasitic beings feed, because they live in that labyrinth. That's it. It's kind of confusing. It's kind of like this. We create the reality that we exist in. We've been caught in a cycle of recreating a reality where we're caught in a cycle of recreating a reality, and so on and so forth. And these beings, in that recreation story, these beings are the ones that are really running the show. When in reality, it is us who are central to the theme, because it doesn't make sense any other way. It doesn't originate from the secondary. The secondary morality is not the fundamental morality. That inversion principle is the basis for the secondary morality being the fundamental morality, meaning do whatever you can to survive, reduce that compassion, and go on and so on and so forth. Because that creates that loop back situation where those beings then become the oppressor. And so, cleverly, the plan has been to subjugate humanity into having them become their own oppressor, and this is by those who know they are actually the oppressors. Of course, since you create your own reality, that made let's just say, quite a conundrum for themselves, because now they're stuck in the loop. They didn't break free of the loop. They just got stuck in a larger loop where now they're creating the time loops that create the time loops that create the time loops that humanity gets subjugated and stuck in. They thought they were going to bounce out the trajectory. Compassion, to harmonize and bridge across the individual selves, or separation between us and the dimensional gaps within us between our component aspects of consciousness or awareness, or the organ system. The harmony is the basis of the unity between them. And so when we are brought into atonement and harmonized, and this happens collectively, that builds the bridge that takes us out of that loop by accessing the capacity to generate and pull from the superimposed parallel possible realities or possibilities, which are basically anything we can imagine. However, given the entire world having a limited imagination, eventually, instead of just having a big cycle of question marks and endless database of what can be imagined, you basically have a tree structure, hierarchical system, kind of like a time wave system, a fractal database, if you will, of the possibilities that people are most likely to, and therefore, given a specific amount of time, have created, and that's what's here. That system is actually what we see if we look around us and detect with these computer systems. And just to add to this, those particular quote-unquote parasitic interdimensionals, they cannot causally interject. They can't create the reason that they're there. However, they can put clues and hints and subliminal not messages, but triggers, maybe subliminal triggers, basically programming to get the individual to welcome them. It's kind of like the vampire system, the tail behind that. So they can't actually abridge free will. They can't abridge free will, but if a person is basically caught slipping, then that is where they can move in and use their entanglements, their ignorance, their addictions, their habits, their mistakes against them, because then they can hide behind them And basically, it's just play it off like, well, these problems are already there. We're just, how do you know the difference between me causing the problem and your problem's just getting worse? So that's how they play out. And it's because they have to, because they can't causally interject. Essentially, they don't exist unless we allow them parameters through which they can leak into our reality, and it's through the mind. They're mind parasites, which means it's causal or probability-based, meaning it's four-dimensional. They're potential etherics, and they subsist and suffice on basically the parallel realities, the failed realities of humanity. In other words, they live on people's bad dreams. It's how they exist. And so, basically, that is the story behind the tales of such a being, of such a bogeyman. They're interdimensional parasites. It's not natural, but it's been here forever. Okay, so in other words, it's nothing new. We have known about this since the beginning of civilization as we know it. And this is what has been discovered in these underground-based situations, as well as what these occult, more so Gnostic secret society families, factions, however you want to put that, have known about for this entire time. And so, yeah, and I did kind of just say there's aspects of the power structure using billions of your tax dollars to chase the bogeyman. However, look at it this way. If this is what inevitably becomes the ultimate parasite, what defeats the civilization, the mind, of humanity, then how serious is that? And then imagine they went to narrow it down, and it turns out that is basically an autonomous functioning containment system without free will, but entirely complex to the degree where it can chase us back. So very, very strange. But now that we know this is a return of the Gnostic wisdom of Sophia, and it will likely get more difficult before it gets all of a sudden better. However, that's a given. And to be clear, it is an issue of interdimensional parasites. And to speak more on that last part, basically how it began is how it can end is the only way. The information will come back out. It's like a sine wave. It'll go down and it'll go back up, and all the information will unveil itself. But this also means that the hidden aspects of reality, including this shadow aspect, this cosmic shadow aspect, will begin to be more prevalent because we'll be seeing it more. But the irony, maybe not irony, but the idea with that is that because we can see it more, maybe this is paradox, again, everything's a paradox, because we can see it more, it has less control over us. It's no longer the invisible parasite. But of course, then those who can't control themselves, namely as far as the fear aspect, and as far as handling the truth of reality, it will get worse for them. So it kind of deviates, it gets simultaneously worse, simultaneously better. And we do heal the whole situation in the reality, the one reality that actually sustains out of all of these parallel side distorted ghost realities, which are basically mirages and branches that don't actually lead back to the whole. It's also worth noting that eventually, given enough knowledge and experience, one would simply lose the tendency towards the fear response. And so eventually that is basically the automatic progression of a civilization to overcome the obstacle, although that's not easy to understand for some, if not most.